Clara Morgan vanished without a trace, and for 17 agonizing days everyone believed she had simply run away. Everyone except her mother, Helen Morgan, whose whispered words, "He finally got her," would unravel a chilling truth no one saw coming. Clara Morgan disappeared on a rainy Monday morning in October, and for a while no one seemed especially alarmed. At 17, she was quiet, smart, and kept to herself. Her teachers called her bright but distracted, and her classmates mostly forgot she was there. Clara had a habit of vanishing into corners of rooms and into the background of conversations, so when she didn't show up to school, people assumed she was just having a rough day. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she finally got tired of everything. Her parents, Helen and Mark Morgan, noticed something was wrong by the afternoon. Clara hadn't texted. Her phone was still plugged into the charger in her room. Her backpack, the one she always used, was missing, but her wallet and ID were still on the nightstand. Her bed was neatly made. The window was locked. There were no signs of struggle, no notes left behind. Mark assumed she'd forgotten her phone and gone to the library or a friend's house. Helen, however, felt something shift the moment she walked into her daughter's room. She would later say it was like the air had been drained out of the house. The Morgans called the police by evening, but the response was slow and cautious. The officer who first arrived took a short statement, looked around the room, and asked about Clara's mental health. Had she ever run away before? Was she upset about anything? Any recent fights at home? They mentioned her grades had dropped slightly. She'd been more withdrawn. None of it felt especially unusual. To the police, it looked like another case of a teenager leaving on her own. Soon the story spread around town. Rumors sprouted like weeds. Some said Clara had a secret boyfriend. Others believed she'd planned to run away to New York or Chicago. A few whispered about a possible pregnancy. Students at school reposted old photos of her, tagging them with "Find Clara," while sharing conspiracy theories about what might have happened. But the truth was, no one really knew Clara Morgan. Not even her friends. She was the kind of girl who sat at the edge of lunch tables and laughed politely without ever joining the conversation. Search parties were organized during the first week. Volunteers combed the woods and lake near Maple Hollow. Drones were used to scan the area from above. Nothing turned up. Police checked nearby bus stations and train terminals. They found no tickets purchased under her name. Her bank account hadn't been touched. No strange messages. No suspicious phone calls. Just nothing. As the days passed, interest waned. The flyers began to fade from telephone poles. People moved on. But Clara's mother didn't. She barely slept. She stopped eating. She kept the porch light on every night. She would sit by the front window until dawn, just in case her daughter came walking up the driveway. Everyone else believed Clara Morgan had simply walked away from her life. But Helen Morgan knew better. Helen Morgan's whispered words, "He finally got her," sent ripples through the town like a rock tossed into still water. It was the first time anyone had publicly suggested Clara hadn't run away. The vigil that night had drawn a small crowd, mostly friends, neighbors, and curious onlookers. Helen had stood among the candles and photographs, her face pale and drawn, her eyes fixed on the ground. When she collapsed, people thought it was exhaustion or grief. But as paramedics helped her up, she repeated those 4 words in a voice, just loud enough to be heard. Detectives were notified immediately. Helen had never mentioned a "he" before. When questioned, she hesitated at first, saying she didn't want to believe it. But now, after weeks with no trace of Clara, her instincts could no longer be quieted. She told police about a man named Vincent Hale, a local handyman who had done work at their house the previous spring. He had painted the kitchen and fixed some electrical issues in the garage. At the time, nothing had seemed unusual. He was quiet, polite, mid-30s, and came with decent reviews. But Clara had been uncomfortable around him, Helen recalled. She'd mentioned once in passing that he stared too long, that he seemed to appear wherever she went in the house. It hadn't seemed serious at the time, just a teenager being wary. Helen hadn't pressed her about it. Now the memory clawed at her. Vincent Hale, a name she hadn't thought of in months, suddenly burned in her mind like a warning she'd ignored. She gave everything she remembered to the police. The investigation up to that point had stalled. But with this new lead, detectives dug into Vincent Hale's background. On paper, he looked clean. No criminal record, no prior complaints. But his work history raised some flags. He moved frequently, often worked cash jobs, and never stayed in one place long. A closer look revealed that several of the homes where he'd worked had daughters Clara's age. No one had made official complaints, but a few homeowners recalled feeling uneasy around him. One mother said her daughter had switched bedrooms after catching Hale looking through her window at night. She hadn't reported it, just told him to leave and never come back. Police tried to find Hale, but discovered he had moved out of his apartment shortly after Clara disappeared. He'd left no forwarding address, and his phone was disconnected. The last known sighting of him was a week after Clara vanished, at a gas station outside the county. Surveillance footage showed him alone, wearing a cap and sunglasses, buying bottled water and canned food. Suddenly, Clara's case was no longer a suspected runaway. It was a possible abduction. The media returned. Reporters picked up Helen's whisper and ran it as a headline. He finally got her. The phrase stuck. It suggested a long-standing fear. It suggested Clara had known something, someone was coming for her. And now, all eyes were on Vincent Hale. Once Vincent Hale became the focus of the investigation, everything began to shift. Detectives who had once been certain Clara Morgan had run away now found themselves re-examining every piece of evidence with fresh eyes. Hale's disappearance wasn't just suspicious, it was alarming. People don't just vanish from their lives without reason unless they have something to hide. Detectives searched the farmhouse he had rented on the outskirts of Maple Hollow. It sat on a quiet, overgrown property, partially hidden by tall trees and untrimmed hedges. From the outside, it looked abandoned. The landlord hadn't checked in for weeks, assuming Hale had left as agreed. But when the police arrived, they found more than they expected. The inside of the house was stripped down, furniture missing, cabinets emptied, and drawers pulled from their frames. But in the basement, something caught an officer's attention, a seam in the concrete wall near the back. Behind it was a hidden room, no bigger than a walk-in closet. It was soundproofed with foam panels, and the door was disguised to blend in with the basement wall. Inside were a single chair, a sleeping bag, and several boxes of personal items. But what truly disturbed investigators were the photographs. Dozens of them taped to the walls and stored in folders, images of teenage girls, most of them taken from a distance. Some looked like they were shot through bedroom windows. Others showed girls walking home from school, riding bikes, sitting on benches. Clara was in at least 6 of the photos. It was clear she had been watched for months. They found something else. Her green jacket, the one she had worn the day she disappeared. It was dirty and torn, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Alongside, it was a cracked hair clip that Helen Morgan later confirmed belonged to her daughter. There was no longer any doubt. Clara had not run away. She had been taken. The search for Hale escalated. Detectives contacted law enforcement in surrounding counties, and states. His name and face were added to bulletins and news broadcasts. Investigators interviewed other families he had worked for, and a chilling pattern began to emerge. Several teenage girls had reported feeling watched, followed, or photographed after Hale had been to their homes. No one had ever linked the incidents together before, and most had never reported them to police. The encounters had been dismissed as creepy but harmless. Until now, the FBI became involved. A profile was developed. Hale had likely stalked Clara for months, possibly longer. He was calculated, methodical, and had a clear interest in teenage girls. They believed he had planned the abduction carefully, choosing Clara not by chance, but because of her quiet, isolated personality. She was the kind of girl who could disappear without drawing too much attention. But Hale had underestimated one thing: Helen Morgan's refusal to believe her daughter had left on her own. Without her whisper, detectives might never have looked his way. Now Clara's case had turned into a full-scale manhunt. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place: a hunter named Dale Whitman, who was checking game cameras deep in Pinewood National Forest, nearly 40 miles from Maple Hollow. While reviewing footage from one of his trail cams, he spotted a figure in the background, partially hidden by trees. It was brief, just a few seconds, but the frame captured a man carrying what looked like a bag of groceries toward a small, isolated structure. Dale, who had been following the Clara Morgan case on the news, contacted authorities the next day. Police and federal agents descended on the forest. After hours of hiking through dense trees and muddy trails, they found it: a one-room cabin, hidden behind a ridge, completely off the grid. It wasn't on any property maps and didn't appear in aerial photos due to the thick canopy overhead. The door was padlocked, but there were signs of recent activity: boot prints in the dirt, tire marks from a bicycle, and smoke stains on a nearby fire pit. Inside, the cabin was dim and cold. A mattress lay on the floor with rumpled blankets and a single pillow. Cans of food were stacked in a corner along with bottles of water and instant coffee. Torn-out pages from old-school yearbooks were taped to the walls, many of them featuring photographs of teenage girls. There were no electronics, no windows, no bathroom. A bucket in the corner suggested Hale had intended to live here long-term. When police forced open a locked side room made of reinforced plywood, they found her. Clara Morgan was sitting on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. She was gaunt, pale, and visibly shaken. Her eyes flinched at the light when the door opened. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared. It took a few seconds before she whispered one word: "Mom?" Rescue workers rushed in. Clara was physically weak, but alive. She was immediately taken to a hospital and kept under observation. Over the next few days, investigators learned pieces of what had happened. Clara had been tricked. Vincent Hale had approached her in a parking lot after school, claiming her mother had been in an accident and sent him to get her. She had hesitated, but when he showed her a familiar object, her mother's bracelet, which he must have stolen, she believed him. He drugged her shortly after she got in his truck. Clara remembered being kept in a basement at first, blindfolded and restrained, then being moved after a few days to the forest cabin. Hale barely spoke. He fed her just enough to keep her alive and never let her outside. She marked the days in her mind, counting the hours until she lost track of time completely. Her rescue made headlines across the state. Police issued a warrant for Hale's arrest. He was caught days later at a bus terminal attempting to flee under a false identity. He had shaved his head and grown a beard, but it wasn't enough. A clerk who had seen his photo recognized him and made the call. The nightmare was over. Clara was safe. But her story, and the terror that had unfolded, was far from forgotten. In the weeks that followed Clara Morgan's rescue, the town of Maple Hollow was left stunned. For days, the story dominated local news. Photographs of the hidden cabin, grainy security footage of Vincent Hale, and video of Clara being led out of the woods draped in a blanket surrounded by agents and paramedics. Reporters lined the Morgan street. Neighbors who once speculated that Clara had simply run away now spoke in hushed tones, shaken by how wrong they had been. But as the headlines faded, the deeper, more unsettling truths began to emerge. Vincent Hale was not just a drifter or an isolated predator. As investigators traced his movements over the past decade, a disturbing pattern surfaced. He had lived under different aliases in at least 3 states. In each place, he took jobs that gave him access to homes and families. In each town there were reports, vague, unconnected, and mostly ignored, of girls who had felt watched, followed, or harassed. And in 2 other towns, girls had gone missing. One of those cases, a 14-year-old named Abby Mitchell from Indiana, bore chilling similarities to Clara's. Abby had vanished while walking home from school 5 years earlier. Her case had gone cold, filed away with no leads. But after Clara was found, Abby's mother contacted investigators. She remembered the name Vincent Hale. He had painted their fence just a month before Abby disappeared. Authorities reopened the case. While no conclusive link had yet been made, Hale's digital devices, seized during his arrest, contained images and journal entries that hinted at years of planning and obsession. Clara's rescue might have prevented another tragedy. It might have brought closure to families who had long given up hope. Back in Maple Hollow, Helen Morgan tried to return to normal life, though normal no longer felt possible. Clara stayed in a trauma recovery center for several weeks before quietly leaving town with her parents. They relocated out of state under a privacy protection program, avoiding reporters and curious strangers. Her father declined all interviews. Helen gave just one statement, a short letter to the public, thanking those who helped and reminding people to trust their instincts, no matter how small or strange they may seem. Clara's story became a cautionary tale told in classrooms and parenting blogs. Her face, once just another teenager lost in the shuffle of high school life, was now a symbol of resilience and survival. Schools updated their safety protocols. Local police held community meetings to address gaps in how they handled missing persons. For a town that once believed things like this don't happen here, the illusion of safety had been shattered. Everyone had believed Clara Morgan ran away. Everyone except her mother. And when Helen whispered those 4 words, he finally got her. She not only changed the course of the investigation, but exposed a predator who had hidden in plain sight. Her voice cracked the silence. Her faith saved a life, and her refusal to stay quiet ensured that Clara came home.